Welcome to Skagit Topics. We're really pleased to have each and every one of you here tonight. Skagit Topics is a program about our history, the history of Skagit County, the Skagit Valley, and the people that came here and are here. We examine all different aspects of history, and tonight we're going to talk about arts and entertainment, or present arts and entertainment. It's an integral part of our history. It's really wonderful to hear Linda singing a little in the background as she was preparing for the program tonight, because it makes your heart sing, and people's hearts have sung in Skagit County for thousands of years, in fact, and only a couple hundred years that the European Americans have been here. Linda Allen is going to Celebrate Washington's Women in Song. Please give a warm welcome to Linda Allen.
I'm going to start out with a song that I wrote as a theme song for the Washington Women's Heritage Project, and this happened, I've kind of forgotten now, I think it was the early 80s, in which the entire project was an attempt to find some of the history of women that had been left out of the more traditional history books. And so they needed a theme song for a traveling exhibit that they were doing, and a slideshow, and this is what I came up with. And it has a chorus. Now, this will happen now and then through the evening, that you'll hear something that you've heard before. That's a chorus. Please jump in and sing anytime. History books give us historical facts of soldiers and sailors and men with their axes, but who filled their bellies? Who washed their clothes? Who raised up the children? Who nurtured their souls? Without all the women, now where would we be? Working and caring throughout history. Their hands on the plow, but their stories untold. Here's to the women who shouldered the load. Now the wilderness held you in the palm of her hand. It took more than muscle to settle this land. Women together set straight to the task, with schools and libraries, a city at last. Without all the women, now where would we be? Working and caring throughout history. Their hands on the plow, but their stories untold. Here's to the women who shouldered the load. It's down at the factory, it's out on the line. A woman is working from morning till night. Her mind on the children, her hand on the brain. If the kids get in trouble, it's she who is blamed. Then it's back home again to do supper and chores, canning and mending and scrubbing the floor. Scarce see the children before they're in bed. Hard life, novel for beans and fried bread. Without all the women, now where would we be? You got it. Working and caring throughout history. Their hands on the plow, but their stories untold. Here's to the women who shouldered the load. In hard times and good times, the women would share their songs and their stories, their loves and their fears, and their histories recorded. The song never ends in the memories of mothers and sisters and friends. Without all the women, now where would we be? Working and caring throughout history. Their hands on the plow, but their stories untold. Here's to the women who shouldered the load. Here's to the women who shouldered the load. I love being in this museum. This is a gem of a museum. I hadn't been here before. But one thing that impressed me right away is there is a real presence of photographs of women. And often those are pretty hard to uncover because their lives weren't considered as important, and there'd be a lot of pictures of the famous men. But I think something kind of unique around here. We have pictures of women working. which is unusual, and women in their homes. And I think it's also pretty neat that in this county you have two cities, which Meg was telling me about, that were named after women. One of them, of course, being O'Connor, named after Louisa Ann. And the other, which I hadn't known, was Anna Curtis.
Yeah.
That was interesting. I didn't know that. So, I'm sure all of you here are pretty familiar with this museum, but if you're not, take some time. It's just a treat. It's a gem. I think what I learned out of that project, out of the Washington Women's Heritage Project, was maybe a new way of looking for history. Because when as I said, when I was learning about history, it tended to be the stories of, well, history was kind of counted from war to war. You know, it was kind of counted by what was important by the men who were writing it down, rather than what's important in women's lives. And what's important in women's lives has tended to be the work they do, but more it's the relationships in the work they do. And it has to do with family, and it has to do with nurturing, with caring for the community, with the kind of work they do in the community. And yet that wasn't considered important, but it was remembered. It's just you had to look in different ways, and you still do, to look for the stories of women's lives. You look in the journals, and you look in the diaries. You look in the family photograph albums, and you listen to the songs that your mothers and the elders might have learned and passed on, because they say a lot about what's important to people, the songs that are passed on. And you look at the crafts that women do. You look at the quilts, and you look at the baskets. And I think by having gone through that process with the Heritage Project, when I had an opportunity during the centennial year to go around as sort of Washington's resident songwriter, I got to go around the state and collect new stories. So I had a different way of looking for stories. I would become very intrigued with the oral histories that were taken. And one that impressed me were women of the Klickitat tribe, who talked about the tradition of basket weaving within their tribe and the importance of certain patterns that would be passed down from mothers to daughters. And about this time, I was also looking through a book of patterns of centennial quilts from Washington State, and aware of how often, too, there are patterns that are passed down from mothers to daughters in quilt making, too, out of my own Anglo tradition. So I put together those two traditions in a song called Weaving and Quilting. My grandmother's hands wove the cedar and bear grass into this fine basket I hold in my hands to hold bitter roots, camas, fern, tiger lily, blackberries, cranberries, gifts from the land. My great-grandma Toussaint passed on her knowledge to her daughter Sally. She was only 6 then. Our tribe's own desire, such a salmon-gill trail of eel, flowers for women and deer for the men. My grandmother's hands worked with bright-colored pattern, taken from dresses I wore long ago, with strong cotton thread and the finest of needles, weaving my memories and pattern she'd sew. My great-grandma Eleanor passed on her knowledge to her daughter Susan when she was just 9. Lone Star Log Cabin, the sweet rose of Sharon, basket, medallion, her favorite design. Salmon gill, trail of eel, flowers and deer, bringing the lives of our ancestors near. Lone Star Log Cabin, basket design, weaving and quilting our story. song is based on a legend. Again, this came out of the songs that I wrote for the centennial. It came out of my year of sort of traveling around the state, visiting museums and visiting a lot of different people and doing a lot of reading about different regions. Came up with 19 songs, new songs about Washington, some about, a lot of them are historically based, and some of them about the places that I visited. Oh, it was a great project. One of the legends that sort of caught my fancy, because I had total freedom. I could write about whatever I wanted to, which was great fun. But I heard that that Catherine Maynard, who was married to Doc Maynard, who was the founder of the city of Seattle, was responsible, supposedly, now this is sort of more in the realm of legend than fact, but supposedly brought a little herb with her when she came west. And this little herb was to be used to help in the medicinal practice, Doc. I've been actually reading a story about Doc and Catherine, and it couldn't have been quite like that. But we'll talk about that in discussion time. As I learn more facts and sort of the legends sort of dissipate, but that's all right. It still makes a good song. So she imported, let's say, this little herb, and it did well in the Northwest. In fact, some people think a little too well. And so this song was actually written more by my daughters than by me. We were traveling together and I was telling them this story, so kind of in the car we came up with this song. Again, it has a pretty good chorus, so sing along. Flowers come in green and pink and red, and they sleep all day in their little flower beds. But the little dandelion grows wild and free, with her uncles and her cousins and the whole family. Dandy, 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 dandelion, something pretty dandy about you. Doodly doodly doo, dandy, 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 dandelion. Wish that there were more of you. Now first you make a wish, then you blow real hard, and the little dandelions blow all over the yard. Then you wait and you hope for your wish to come true. Yes, there's only so much a dandelion can do. Dandy, 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 dandelion, something pretty dandy about you. Doodly doodly doo. Dandy, 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 dandelion, I wish that there were more of you. Now, if you have trouble with the chorus, now by the next time I expect you all to be pretty good at this, but if you have trouble, at least come in on the doodly-doo-doo-doo part. Now in the 1800s things were weak and bare, not a little dandelion anywhere. But Kathy Maynard knew the dandelions cured, so she brought them to Washington, and we thank her. Dandy, 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 dandelion, something pretty dandy about you. Next. Dandy, 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 dandelion, wish that there were more of you. Now some people think that dandelions are a pest, but I think dandelions are the best. Dandelions, don't you know, are really cool, and dandelion haters should go back to school. Dandy, 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 dandelion, something pretty dandy about you. Dandy, 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 dandelion, I wish that there were more of you. You can make them into necklaces and bracelets too. You can decorate your laces to tie your shoe. You can make them into salad greens and dandelion tea. That's why dandelions are for me. Dandy, 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 dandelion, something pretty dandy about you. morning, but I just could not come here without singing this one. And some of you are going to be familiar with it because Holly Graham is from here. Holly Graham? Yay! Fine writer, fine singer. And when I was collecting songs about Washington, which is before the project in which I wrote new songs, I was doing a lot of collecting of songs about Washington. And Holly submitted this wonderful one, which unfortunately didn't make it in the final book, but it's quite delightful. And it's based on the story of Louisa Ann Connor when she came here, and I was just figuring it out. She was about 22 in 1865 when she made the trip. And her husband, John Connor, did something fairly unique. He attached a wagon to the back of their ox-drawn wagon, and he attached another little two-wheeled wagon in the back of that, which was her bed and little riding table, and where she could kind of escape and have her own little retreat on the path, which I thought was quite wonderful. So their wagon train became known as the train with a six-wheeled wagon. So that's what she based her song on. So I'm going to give it the best rendition I can. It won't be Holly, but I want you to hear the song. She wrote it as though it were sung by the children who were on the train. In our four-wheeled prairie schooner, on our way to the great Northwest, we are rolling across the country over plains and mountain crests. There are 30 able travelers, and our footsteps are unflagging as we make our way to the livelong day on the train with the six-wheeled wagon. On the wagon train, the ox-drawn train, train with a six-wheeled wagon. On the wagon train, the ox-drawn train, on the train with a six-wheeled wagon. Now you gotta help me out with this chorus anyway, okay? I help Paul with the oxen team, I help Paul with the meals. I like to sew when the clothes get torn, and I help mend the wheels. I like the time when the wagons circle and we all settle down for the night. I like the start of a brand new day when we're off like birds in the flight. On the wagon train, the ox-drawn train, train with a six-wheel wagon. On the wagon train, the ox-drawn train, train with a six-wheel wagon. I like the stories Daddy tells when he tucks me into bed, and I get excited wondering about the things that lie ahead. Sometimes there is danger, we've been very blessed. I know we're gonna make it to our new home in the West. On the wagon train, the ox-drawn train, train with a six-wheel wagon. On the wagon train, the ox-drawn train, train with a six-wheel wagon. Last time, on the wagon train, the ox-drawn train, train with a six-wheel wagon. On the wagon train, the ox-drawn train, train with a six-wheel wagon. What a nice contribution to the music of your area. This next one is a little different because I read a book called Women's Diaries of the Westward Journey by Lillian Schlissel, and it gave me a much different viewpoint of what the wagon train, what that journey was like for women. For one thing, for the most part, they didn't have much choice. Their husband said go, they went. They didn't have a whole lot of choice. And yet women were so connected with their families and their community, as women always are. It must have been a terrible wrench. It must have been very difficult. I think Holly's song captured the spirit of adventure, which was certainly probably more true with the children. And I would guess it was true of some people on the trail. I know it was. But as I read through the diaries and the writings of the women who had actually made that trip, I was appalled at how very difficult it was. I hadn't heard, for instance, about the cholera epidemic and the incredible toll that that took on the families. So, including Catherine Maynard, I recently heard, lost her husband, lost her father, lost a number of family members on her trip over to cholera. So this next song is a very different feel, but it captures some of the a lot of the, even though it's about a fictional character, it very much captures the incidents that would repeat themselves in the women's writings again and again and again. The incidents that you'll hear in the song are not unusual. My name is Emma Logan and I come from Tennessee. And there I spent my childhood with my friends and family. I married young John Logan back in 1844. That day he promised Pa we'd never go far from his door. The children came so quickly, but my ma was so close by. She'd help out for the births and then she'd hold them when they'd cry. I thought my life was settled till the day John said to me, "Pack the wagon, woman, we are leaving Tennessee." He had a notion to go west, he was the restless sort. And Lord knows land was scarce, and our money always short. Still I cried the day he told me, and I begged for us to stay. He only said, "We're going, it's best we don't delay." 'Twas in the spring of '52 that we left Tennessee, leaving my dear mother, who I never more will see, and my friends. I thought my heart would break to leave them all behind, for my husband's great adventure, his fortune for to find. For 2 months we had traveled, and half our oxen dead. Our wagon being slow, the others chose to go ahead. We measured each day's progress by the miles and by the graves. And the fear that gripped my heart I will remember all my days. The baby came in August in a cold Sierra storm, and we huddled in the cold and wet and waited for the morn. How I longed for women's company, a woman's tender care. Next morning early we moved out to rest, we did not dare. My sweet baby Sierra was the first child that did die, and we laid her in the heart baked earth, and I too weak to cry. Then cholera took my oldest boy. His sister Annabelle fell out of the wagon and was crushed beneath the wheels. Half my children gone and the winter coming on. We came to California, nearly starved, our money gone. John went to pan for gold and soon forgot the kids and me. And now I take in washing and I curse his memory. Now if your husband tells you, load the wagons, you must go. To seek your fortune in the West, my dear, you must not go. But remember what I've told you, lest your fate should be my own. Make your own choice, let him go. You're better off alone. Well, there were, of course, from the 1840s on, and probably far before that, women began agitating for this little right that got left out of the Constitution, their right to vote. And they figured it was about time, and they started working very hard for it. And in Washington State, the vote was achieved for women fully 10 years before it was passed nationally. And this was due in large part to the efforts of two women, Emma Smith DeVoe and May R. Craig Hutton. But before I tell them, I have a couple of things to read you about suffrage that are pretty fun. These are some quotes from women were saying in Washington about suffrage. One was Julia Butler Hanson. Now, she was a senator, wasn't she, or a representative? I'm trying to recall, but I think she was certainly an early politician in this state. And she says, men would be going to the polls to vote. First they go visit the blind pig to get a few drinks so they could be told how to vote. They couldn't read or write, and yet they were voting.
And here was my grandmother, a very literate woman who could not vote just because she was a woman. And then there's Bertha Landis, who was quoted, she was the mayor of Seattle back in the 20s, which is pretty amazing. And she wrote a book called Steering a Big City Straight. And this was a quote from Bertha. Municipal housekeeping. It isn't just a figure of speech to me, it's a creed, which is just this. A city is simply a larger home. City governments exist largely because of the family and the home, and their first duty is to serve these two institutions. In the long run, whatever is for the good of the family and home is for the financial good of the city. Now, May Arkwright Hutton, who was one of the women that I mentioned, said this about it. Equal suffrage simply means that women will be man's helpmate and companion, not his toy. Now, let me tell you just a little bit about these two women. Now, Emma and May were very different kinds of women. Now, Emma Smith DeVoe was living in Tacoma. In fact, she'd moved here specifically to work on suffrage. She had heard Susan B. Anthony as a young woman, was very impressed by her. And she was quite prim and proper. I've actually met someone who knew her, a woman who was 100, I'm not sure she's still living, she was 100 when I met her. And she had remembered Emma as a woman who was given to wearing high lace collars. And she kind of shunned publicity. She believed in working behind the scenes, doing things like holding teas for the legislators' wives. Now, May was a very different kind of person. She came from Idaho, where she had had the right to vote, and she was, let's say, an earthy woman. She was a big woman. She loved publicity, was given to wearing big hats. She moved to Spokane and began immediately working for the vote, along with a lot of other good works, because she had a lot of money, and she was using it well. When there were cars, she had to be one of the first to have a big red one. These two women clashed, to say the least. In fact, at one point, Emma's secretary sent a letter to May saying she thought she was not eligible for membership in the Washington Women's Suffrage Association because of her coarse language and questionable past. So this set the stage for these two women. Emma Smith DeVoe was a lady of no small acclaim. Her name was synonymous with grace and gentility. Emma Smith DeVoe was a leader of wit and of charm. Her style was disarmingly steeped in civility. And then there was May, May Arkwright Hutton from the east side of the mountains with a passion for a fight. May, bigger than an army, hats and furs and feathers, lordy mercy, what a sight. Emma Smith DeVoe was a slow, thoughtful lady whose style was to smile as she lobbied for women's equality. Emma came from the east to Tacoma in 1906. She organized women to fight but act womanly. And then there was May, May Arkwright Hutton, rags to riches lady, made a fortune in the mine. May, loud, bold, and brassy, impudent and sassy, never one to toe the line. Emma and May, how they argued and lobbied and fought. Each thought that the other's defeat would bring victory. It still goes on today, some fly high and as bright as a kite, but the strings held by those on the earth planted solidly. Women like Emma, not like May, but one or the other. Women like May, May Arkwright Hutton, wild and strong and common, for workers' rights, people who were working to unionize workers, people who were fighting a lot of battles. And I remember hearing somewhat about union troubles and union struggles when I was studying Washington history years ago when I was still in high school. But I never heard much about any women who were leaders. And there was one woman, I think there were many women, but one whose story particularly touched me was a woman who lived in Aberdeen. And what's interesting about studying history that it's at least somewhat within this century is that you can still find people who knew them. And I have met a number of people now who knew Laura Law. And Laura died in 1940, which is something about what the song is about. And I met a lawyer who was involved with the case. I met her grandson. I met another newspaper publisher. I met some very, very interesting people who were passionately involved with Laura's story. And then just a couple months ago, I got a letter from her son, which touched me deeply, and that somehow the song traveled to him, who is now living in California. And every contact, I learn a little bit more about her. I just feel like her spirit is alive and well, and somehow her story had to keep coming out. So this is the story of Laura Law. She was an activist. She was married to a man who was a union organizer, and she served in soup kitchens and did a fair amount of organizing herself at a time when it was fairly dangerous to do so, and there were a number of threats against her life and against her husband's life. And this is her story.
Shadow fell over the wonder who killed Laura Lord. She was born in Finland in 1914, and she came to America, to the town of Aberdeen, where the logging was good and the timber was clean. And beware to those who oppose them. I met a woman in Roslyn. His name is Virginia Brodeen. She was an activist back in the 30s and 40s, and she still is an activist. Right now she's fighting in Roslyn. I guess they're trying to build some kind of a development, and she's fighting that. And she must be in her 80s, at least in her 80s. And Virginia, back in the late 30s, early 40s, was working as a domestic worker in Seattle and was trying to organize domestic workers. Now, she was not a whole lot more successful then as people are now, because most domestic workers still are not organized. And I'm not sure the conditions have changed all that much than what she's going to describe, what she describes in the song I'm about to sing for you from the late 30s. And from, this is from the Journal of Mary Richardson Walker, and she wrote this in 1842. She's an early missionary who helped establish a mission near Spokane. Rose about 5 o'clock, had an early breakfast, got my housework done up about 9, baked 6 more loaves of bread, made a kettle of mush, and have made out to put my clothes away and set my house in order. May the mercy of the merciful be with me through the expected scene. 9 o'clock p.m. was delivered of a son. Oh, just an ordinary day. So this is Virginia's song. We're coming from the nursery and from the kitchen too, and we're coming from the laundry where there's always work to do, and we're joining hands in friendship and we're joining in the song. If we build a league together, it'll make us strong. Come on, girls, join us in the chorus. Come on, girls, make the rafters ring. One alone can't speak above a whisper. When we get together, they can hear us sing. When we get together, they can hear us sing. You all know this song? You heard it? No? No, it's just easy to catch. All right. Now, some girls work from 9 to 5 or till the whistles blow. Some don't have to work at all. Papa's making dough. No matter how we start our day, how fast our work we do, the whistles blow for us because we're never through. Come on, girls, join us in the chorus. Come on, girls, make the rafters ring. One alone can't speak above a whisper. When we get together, they can hear us sing. When we get together, they can hear us sing. They can see the rows and rows of clothes we hang upon the line. They can always see the tarnish if the silver needs a shine. They can see 100 extra things they'd like to have us do. Why is it they so seldom see our point of view? Come on, girls, join us in the chorus. Come on, girls, make the rafters ring. One alone can't speak above a whisper. When we get together, they can hear us sing. When we get together, they can hear us sing. Well, this next one comes just right around the same time. There was a quote that I read from the Washington Women's History Project of a woman who worked at Boeing. And she was one of that large number of women known as Rosie the Rooters. My mother was one too. These were the women who took the place of the men who'd gone off to war. And this is the quote. This is what this woman
Frances. I've forgotten her last name. Here we go. Frances Meskerman. This is what she said from an oral interview. And the day the war ended, every woman in there got it. Lead man came round and says, Frances, tonight you can hang your torch up, your job's done, the war is over. And on that day I picked up a piece of scrap iron and lit my torch and wrote my name on it. That was in 1945. This is my proof for my grandchildren and great-grandchildren that I really was a burner in the wartime. I don't know anything more about the story than that. So I kind of made one up. Because the fact was, when the women entered the workforce, for the first time they found, first of all, that they could do the jobs that the men had traditionally done, and that they could, in some cases, get those kinds of wages, and it was pretty tough to then be told to go back home. And in many cases, the women really didn't have an option to go back home and still had to work. So this is a story I just kind of made up based on that. My strong right arm built the ship that sailed to war. My strong right arm built the ship, and what was that all for? In 1941, the war had just begun. Jim was so young, but soon was off to hold a gun. I was 19, our child was only 3, when the paper said the shipyards needed me. I moved to Bremerton in 1942. I learned to well, I was the best one on our crew. The work was hard, the heat would burn my lungs all day, but when the paycheck came, we girls would feel okay. In 1943, in August, 8 a.m., I'd not been sleeping well, my mind was filled with Jim. There was a knock, a man in uniform stood there. He said my Jim was dead. I hadn't seen him in 2 years. In 1945, the war came to an end, and on that very day, the big boss, he came in. He smiled and said, my girls, the boys are coming home. You've earned a rest, go home. Your work here now is done. Picked up a scrap of metal, and I carved my name full bore, so my child would know I was a welder in the war. No place to go, I was a widow with a child, so I waitressed and I cooked and I married in a while. Sometimes I see that scrap with my name carved in so deep, and I recall the day the boss told me to leave, how I felt like some old rag they tossed aside, as useless as my patriotic pride. My strong right arm built the ship that sailed to war. My strong right arm built the ship, and what was that all for? Leave you with this thought. I just want you to think about who's going to tell your story? Who's going to preserve it? What ways are you finding to tell your story? Through a song, through a painting, through a quilt, through, find some way to let your story be known. One project that I've become really intrigued with has to do with recipes. The fact that I have so many of my memories about family members and friends wrapped up in my recipe box. Every time I flip through, there's, and you may remember the occasion in which you ate this food, or you may remember the person who gave it to you. But it's another way we have of hanging on to our history. So I'm going to give you a little present. This is a recipe song. Now it has a chorus that if you learn it at the end of the song, you'll have a new recipe. No fair writing it down. No, this is to sing a chorus. Well, this this is called Sally's Quiche, and the history of this is a friend, a woman who became a very good friend of mine. At the time, I only knew her slightly. And when my second child was born, and it was sort of after the initial rush, and I was kind of left there with two tiny children, and I was absolutely overwhelmed. And about that time, she came to my door with a basket with beautifully fresh-baked quiche and a salad and a bottle of wine. And I was so moved by that I just had to write her a song, and we became very good friends. It's called Sally's Quiche. I want to thank you, too, for being here and for being so attentive. There weren't many of you, but you made it all worthwhile. Thank you. And thanks for arranging this, for inviting me here. First tried Sally's recipe a few years ago. When the baby was newborn, I felt kind of low. Sally came with a smile and a salad and quiche. I wonder if she ever knew what joy that brought me. 2 cups of milk and 2 cups grated cheese, 4 pats of butter, a half cup Frosties, 4 eggs and some spinach, spices to please. Bake 45 minutes, 350 degrees. Sally brought me the recipe, said it had served her well in raising her children for years by herself. It didn't take long, and that's important, she said, when your children are crying and need to be fed. 2 cups of milk and 2 cups grated cheese, 4 pats of butter, a half cup Frosties, 4 eggs and some spinach, spices to please. Bake 45 minutes, 350 degrees. And Sally brought wisdom and comfort and care, and the recipe brings back the friendship we share. It's an age-old tradition our foremothers knew. In grateful remembrance, I pass it to you.